The key to my father's old roll-top desk felt cool in my palm, a small, intricate piece of brass I hadn't thought about in years. My sister, Amanda, stood in the doorway of what had been Dad's study, her arms crossed, a smug, proprietary air about her that was as new as the aggressively modern art she'd already hung on one of the walls, obscuring the faded wallpaper Dad had loved. "You have 24 hours to clear out your personal effects, Michael," she announced, her voice devoid of any familial warmth, crisp as a freshly printed eviction notice. "The estate has been settled, the house is legally mine now, and I intend to begin renovations immediately. Sentimentality doesn't pay the mortgage, you know. My name is Michael Stratton, 54 years old, and for the better part of the last decade, I've been the primary caregiver for our father, Arthur Stratton, a retired master carpenter whose hands, once so strong and capable, had been progressively gnarled and weakened by severe arthritis. Amanda, 5 years my junior, had always been the ambitious one, her visits to Dad increasingly infrequent as her career and lifestyle influencing. A term I still found baffling, apparently took her to ever more exotic and, presumably, father-free locales. I didn't argue with her. There was no point. The lawyer Amanda had hired, a slick city type named Bartholomew Thorne whose fees alone probably exceeded Dad's annual pension, had apparently moved with astonishing speed after Dad's passing 3 weeks ago. The will she'd presented, a surprisingly simple document dated only 6 months prior, had named her sole beneficiary of the modest family home and its contents. My own inheritance, according to this document, was a token sum, barely enough to cover a month's rent on a small apartment, and a vague injunction to take whatever sentimental items hold meaning for me. The meaning, it seemed, was now dictated by Amanda's 24-hour deadline. I nodded slowly, my gaze sweeping over the room Dad had loved, his worn leather armchair, the shelves overflowing with books on woodworking and local history, the faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco and lemon oil. "Understood, Amanda. I'll be out by tomorrow afternoon." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. I think she'd expected a fight, tears, perhaps some undignified pleading. My quiet acquiescence seemed to momentarily deflate her. "Good," she said, recovering quickly. "Don't take anything valuable. The appraiser is coming on Monday, and I don't want any discrepancies." The implication was clear. She suspected me of planning to pilfer the family silver, a notion so at odds with my character and Dad's lifelong lessons in honesty that it was almost laughable. Almost. I spent the rest of that day packing, not just my few personal belongings from the small bedroom I'd occupied since moving back into care for Dad, but also carefully boxing up his tools, his journals, his photograph albums, the true valuables, the items that held the real currency of his life. Amanda watched me like a hawk, her phone pressed her ear as she discussed color palettes and kitchen islands with someone she kept calling darling. Each box I carried out to my aging pickup truck felt like another piece of my father being erased, another memory being relegated to storage. What Amanda didn't know, what she had likely never bothered to ascertain in her whirlwind of self-interest, was that Dad, for all his quiet simplicity, was a man of meticulous habits and deep-seated principles. He believed in fairness, in rewarding loyalty, and he had a profound distrust of anything that felt too slick. Like Bartholomew Thorne, for instance, or increasingly like his own daughter. And Dad, a master craftsman, knew how to build things to last, including contingency plans. The key in my palm, the one to his old roll-top desk, a piece he'd built himself in his youth, was a detail Amanda had overlooked in her haste to claim her spoils. That desk, unlike the rest of the house's contents, hadn't been mentioned specifically in her version of the will. It was just old furniture to her, probably destined for the skip. To Dad, however, that desk had been his sanctuary, the repository of his most important papers, his most private thoughts. And he'd given me this spare key years ago, with a wink and a cryptic, "Always good to have a backup, son. You never know when the main mechanism might jam, or when someone might try to change the combination." I hadn't understood its full significance then. I was beginning to now. As the last rays of the setting sun slanted through the dusty windows of the study, casting long shadows that seemed to mourn Dad's absence. I slid the key into the lock of the roll top. It turned with a satisfying, well-oiled click. Amanda was in the kitchen, loudly berating a contractor over the phone about the unacceptable cost of Italian marble. The archive of my father's true intentions, I suspected, was about to be opened, and I had a feeling it would contain a very different narrative than the one Amanda was currently trying to impose. The roll top of the old desk glided upwards with a smooth, whispering sound, revealing a warren of pigeonholes, small drawers, and a central, leather-topped writing surface. It smelled faintly of Dad, that unique blend of aged wood, pipe tobacco, and the beeswax polish he'd used religiously every month. Amanda's voice, sharp and aggrieved, still echoed from the kitchen as she argued about the merits of underfloor heating versus quaint, but ultimately impractical cast-iron radiators. Her concerns were with the superficial, the aesthetic refit of a life she had barely participated in. Mine, at this moment, were with its core, its foundational documents. I started methodically, as Dad had taught me, left to right, top to bottom. Old invoices, receipts for lumber and tools from decades past, membership cards for woodworking guilds, a faded photograph of my mother, gone now 20 years, her smile as warm and genuine as I remembered. Each item was a small, tangible piece of his history, a testament to a life lived with quiet dignity and skilled hands. The lower drawers were filled with his meticulously kept journals, bound in worn leather, their pages filled with his neat, slightly slanted script. He documented everything: his projects, his thoughts on the changing world, his pride in my own quiet successes as a historical restoration consultant, a field I'd chosen largely due to his influence, his love for things well-made and respectfully preserved, and, in later years, his growing concern over Amanda's choices, her embrace of a shallow, materialistic lifestyle, her increasing distance from the family values he held dear. I found one entry from about a year ago, shortly after Amanda's last, brief visit, during which she'd spent most of her time on her phone, taking selfies in various parts of the house, captioning them with hashtags like #FamilyRoots and #HeritageHome, as if staking an early digital claim. Dad had written, "Amanda came and went like a bright, noisy bird, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a vague sense of unease. She talks of leveraging assets and brand potential. I fear she sees this old house not as a home, but as a commodity. I must ensure Michael is protected. He has been a good son, a steadfast support. The house is more than wood and nails. It holds our memories. It should go to the one who understands its true worth, or at least, its division should be fair." My heart ached at his words, at his clear-eyed assessment of his own daughter, at his quiet determination to ensure fairness. This entry alone suggested that the will Amanda had presented, the one naming her sole beneficiary, was a recent, and perhaps coerced, deviation from his long-held intentions. But a journal entry, however poignant, was not a legal document. I needed something more. The central compartment of the desk was locked, a smaller, more intricate brass lock than the one for the roll top itself. I didn't have a key for this one. Amanda's voice from the kitchen rose in pitch as she apparently moved on to haranguing a painter about the precise shade of grayish she envisioned for the living room. Time was not on my side. I carefully examined the lock. It was old, but well-made, a testament to Dad's craftsmanship even in the details of his own furniture. I thought back to my childhood, to the hours I'd spent in his workshop, watching him, learning from him. He taught me how to pick simple locks, not for any nefarious purpose, but as an exercise in understanding mechanics, in patience, in feeling the subtle clicks and shifts of the tumblers. "Sometimes, Michael," he'd said, a twinkle in his eye, "the most obvious key isn't the only way in. You just need the right tools and a bit of finesse." The right tools in this instance were a sturdy paperclip from a nearby tray of his old correspondence and a small, thin metal nail file I happened to have in my wallet from a long-forgotten hotel sewing kit. It was a crude approximation of a tension wrench and a pick, but Dad had always valued resourcefulness. Amanda was now, it seemed, discussing the merits of a minimalist Scandinavian design for the bathroom, a concept so utterly alien to Dad's warm, cluttered aesthetic that it felt like a desecration. I worked quickly, my fingers remembering the lessons of my youth, the gentle pressure, the subtle rotations. After a few tense minutes, I felt the telltale click. The small door swung open. Inside, there was only one item, a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the insignia of a local, well-respected law firm, Henderson and Albright, Dad's solicitors for over 40 years. Not Bartholomew Thorne, Amanda's high-priced legal shark. The envelope was addressed simply to Michael. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. This felt significant. I carefully broke the seal. Inside, there were two documents. The first was a formally executed last will and testament, dated 2 years prior, witnessed by Mr. Henderson and his longtime paralegal. It was a comprehensive document, meticulously detailing the disposition of all his assets. And in this will, the house, his tools, his savings, everything was to be divided equally between Amanda and me. There was also a specific clause bequeathing his roll-top desk and its contents, along with his journals, exclusively to me, citing my shared appreciation for history, craftsmanship, and the quiet stories held within old things. The second document was a handwritten letter from Dad on his familiar, cream-colored stationery, dated the same day as the will. "My dearest Michael," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I am gone, and that certain, predictable human frailties may have come to the fore. I trust you have found this in the place I always intended, should the need arise. This will, the one prepared by Mr. Henderson, reflects my truest wishes for the fair disposition of what little I have to leave. I have, however, recently been under some considerable pressure from your sister and her advisors to make certain alterations. I may, in a moment of weakness, or perhaps out of a weary desire for peace in my final days, sign another document. If such a document surfaces, one that differs significantly from this, I want you to know that it does not represent my deepest, most carefully considered desires, but rather the unfortunate consequence of, let's call it, persuasive counsel during a vulnerable time." His words, so calm, so prescient, hit me with the force of a physical blow. He had foreseen this. He had known Amanda's nature, known the kind of pressure she, and men like Thorne, were capable of exerting. He had been preparing his own contingency plan, his own archival defense, all along. The letter continued. "Mr. Henderson holds the original of this true will. He is aware of my concerns. He is a good man, Michael, a man of integrity, much like yourself. Trust him. Your sister. I love her, of course, but she has chosen a different path, one that values glitter over substance. I fear it will not bring her the happiness she seeks. Ensure your own happiness, my son. Live with integrity. Preserve what is truly valuable, and know that you were, and always will be, a son a father could be immensely proud of. With all my love, Dad." I folded the letter, a lump in my throat, a fierce, protective anger mixing with a profound sense of grief and love. Amanda's version of the will, the one that disinherited me, was almost certainly the product of that persuasive counsel Dad had written about. Undue influence. Coercion of a vulnerable, elderly man. The legal terms clicked into place in my forensic accountant's brain. I now held the key, not just to Dad's desk, but to the truth, to justice. Amanda's smug pronouncements about her renovations and her appraiser suddenly seemed like the hollow posturing of a pretender to a throne she had no legitimate claim to. The game had just changed, and I had the original blueprints. I carefully placed Dad's true will and his poignant letter back into the thick cream envelope, my mind racing, no longer with the dull ache of grief and injustice, but with the sharp, focused energy of a man with a clear objective. Amanda was still in the kitchen, her voice now a saccharine coo as she described her vision for an artisanal herb garden just outside the window, a space currently occupied by Dad's beloved, if somewhat unruly, rose bushes. Her plans for erasure were comprehensive. My first call, I knew, had to be to Mr. Henderson at Henderson and Albright. It was late afternoon on a Friday, but I prayed he, or someone at his firm who understood the gravity of the situation, would be available. I slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket, closed the central compartment of the desk, and relocked it. Then, with a deep breath, I rose and walked towards the kitchen. Amanda looked up as I entered, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face at the interruption to her horticultural fantasizing. "Finished packing your ephemera, Michael?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Almost," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Just a few more things. Amanda, I need to ask you something about the will. The one Mr. Thorne handled for Dad." She stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "It's perfectly straightforward. Dad left me the house. It's what he wanted. It's just, it seems rather different from the arrangements Dad had discussed with me over the years," I said, choosing my words carefully. "He always implied things would be more equitable." Amanda laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, Michael, you always were a bit naive, weren't you? People change their minds, especially when they get older and realize who's really been there for them, who has the vision to carry on their legacy." Her gaze swept around the slightly shabby kitchen, a look of distaste on her face. "This place needs a complete overhaul. Dad was stuck in the past. I'm looking to the future." "And Mr. Thorne," I pressed gently, "he advised Dad on these new arrangements?" "Of course," she said, fluffing her perfectly coiffed hair. "Bartholomew is a brilliant legal mind. He specializes in estate planning for high-net-worth individuals. He saw immediately that Dad's previous arrangements were inadequate, not reflective of Dad's true wishes to see his primary asset preserved and enhanced under capable management. High-net-worth individuals. Dad's estate, while comfortable, was hardly in that league." Thorne was clearly flattering Amanda, playing to her aspirations of grandeur, and preserved and enhanced under capable management was a rather euphemistic way of saying handed over entirely to Amanda to do with as she pleased. I had what I needed from her for now: confirmation of Thorne's involvement and a clear statement of her belief in the legitimacy of the will she possessed. The dramatic irony was almost too much to bear. I retreated to Dad's study, ostensibly to finish my packing, but in reality, to make the most important phone call of my life. I found Mr. Henderson's number in Dad's old, battered address book. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm and familiar, though tinged with a note of surprise at hearing from me so soon after the funeral. "Michael, my boy, how are you holding up?" "Mr. Henderson," I began, "I need to speak with you urgently. It's about my father's will. Amanda has presented a document, prepared by a lawyer named Bartholomew Thorne, that names her sole beneficiary of the estate. It doesn't seem right." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Henderson's voice, when it came, was grim. "Thorne, you say?" "Yes, I've heard of him. Not favorably." "Michael, your father was concerned about this very eventuality. He spoke to me about it at length. He was under considerable pressure." "I know, sir," I said. "I found a letter, and another will, in his desk, dated 2 years ago, the one you prepared." Another silence, this one shorter, sharper. "He told me where he'd keep it," Mr. Henderson said, his voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and a new, steely resolve. "He said it was his failsafe. Michael, can you bring those documents to my office first thing Monday morning, 9 a.m., and say nothing more to your sister? Let her proceed with her renovations." "Yes, sir. I'll be there." "Good lad. And Michael, your father was a fine man, a man of his word. We'll see that his true wishes are honored." There was a quiet strength in his voice that was immensely reassuring. After ending the call, I carefully packed the remaining items from Dad's desk, his journals, his treasured fountain pen, a few other small mementos. The envelope containing the true will and his letter I kept on my person. That night, I slept fitfully on the lumpy mattress of the spare room, Amanda's pronouncements about Italian marble and designer paint colors echoing in my mind. She had no idea what was coming. She was busy planning the redecoration of a house she didn't truly own, based on a will that was about to be challenged by the very man she had so casually and cruelly dispossessed. The irony was not lost on me. Dad had always said, measure twice, cut once. Amanda, in her haste and greed, had failed to measure at all. She had simply grabbed the saw and started cutting, oblivious to the structural integrity of the situation and the meticulously laid countermeasures her quiet, unassuming father had put in place. The next day, I moved my few belongings into a small, short-term rental apartment I'd found online. It was Spartan, a world away from the familiar comfort of Dad's house, but it was a temporary refuge, a base of operations. As I left the house for the final time, Amanda was in the front garden with a landscape designer, animatedly discussing the removal of Dad's beloved rose bushes to make way for a zen gravel garden with minimalist water features. She barely glanced at me as I drove away, too engrossed in her vision of a future that was, unbeknownst to her, built on a foundation of deceit and a legally invalid document. The appraiser, I knew, was due on Monday. So was I, at Mr. Henderson's office. It was going to be an interesting start to the week. The quiet craftsman's son, the overlooked caregiver, was about to demonstrate that he, too, understood the importance of solid groundwork and precise execution. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, a typical early autumn day. As I drove to Mr. Henderson's office, the city was just beginning to stir, the usual weekday rhythm of commuters and commerce a stark contrast to the quiet, focused intensity that hummed within me. I clutched the briefcase containing Dad's true will and his letter, the weight of them both a tangible reassurance. Amanda, I imagined, was at that very moment probably meeting with her appraiser, perhaps already calculating the potential profit from the sale of the house or the equity she could leverage for her next lifestyle upgrade. Mr. Henderson greeted me with a firm handshake and a kind, understanding gaze. His office was old-fashioned, filled with leather-bound books and the quiet dignity of a long and honorable legal career. It was a world away from the slick, modern aesthetics of what I imagined Bartholomew Thorne's premises to be. "Michael, thank you for coming so promptly," he said, gesturing me to a comfortable chair. "Please, let me see what your father entrusted to you." I handed him the envelope. He read the will first, nodding slowly, his expression growing more resolute with each page. Then, he read Dad's handwritten letter, his eyes softening for a moment before hardening again with a look of quiet indignation. "This is precisely as Arthur described it to me," he said, placing the letter carefully on his desk. The pressure, the concerns about Amanda's judgment, her association with Thorne. Arthur was a good man, Michael, but he was tired, and in his final months, he was not as robust in his defenses as he once was. This Thorne character, and Amanda, they clearly exploited that. He looked at me. "This document," he tapped the will he had prepared, "is, in my professional opinion, the true and valid testament of Arthur Stratton's wishes. The subsequent will presented by your sister, prepared under circumstances your father himself described as coercive, is highly vulnerable to a legal challenge on the grounds of undue influence, and possibly lack of testamentary capacity if your father's health was significantly compromised at the time of its signing. Dad's arthritis was very severe towards the end, Mr. Henderson," I said. His hands, he could barely hold a pen some days. And his mind, while generally clear, did have moments of confusion, especially if he was in pain or over-medicated. Mr. Henderson made a note. "That's important. We will need to gather medical records, perhaps statement from his physician, any home care nurses. The burden of proof will be on us to demonstrate that the newer will is invalid, but your father's letter, his clear statement of his concerns and intentions, is an exceptionally strong piece of evidence in our favor. It's almost as if he prepared our case for us." He paused, then a grim smile touched his lips. Arthur always was a meticulous planner. He then outlined the strategy. First, they would send a formal letter to Bartholomew Thorne and Amanda, notifying them of our intention to contest the probate of the will Amanda had presented and formally submitting Dad's true will for probate instead. This letter would also demand an immediate cessation of any actions related to the disposition of the estate, including any renovations or appraisals of the house, pending a court determination. This will undoubtedly elicit a strong reaction from Mr. Thorne and your sister, Mr. Henderson cautioned. They will likely bluster, threaten, perhaps even try to intimidate you. You must refer all communications to me. Do not engage with them directly. Understood, I said. What if they refuse to cooperate? Then we file a formal caveat with the probate court, which will halt any proceedings under their purported will, and we initiate legal action to have your father's true will validated. It may take time, Michael. These things can be protracted. But given the evidence your father so thoughtfully provided, I am cautiously optimistic about our chances of success. He then asked me detailed questions about Dad's final months, Amanda's visits, Thorne's involvement, any specific instances of pressure or manipulation I had witnessed or Dad had mentioned. I recounted everything I could remember, the small, seemingly insignificant details, now taking on a new, critical importance. The way Amanda would isolate Dad, shooing me out of the room for their private chats. The expensive gifts she'd suddenly started bringing him, so out of character for her usual self-absorption. The way Thorne's name had begun to crop up in Dad's conversations, always with a note of weariness or unease. By the time I left Mr. Henderson's office several hours later, I felt a profound sense of relief, mixed with a steely determination. The path ahead was clear. Dad's foresight had provided the map, and Mr. Henderson was the experienced navigator who would help me traverse it. As I drove back to my small rental apartment, my phone buzzed. It was Amanda. I let it go to voicemail. Her message, when I listened to it later, was exultant. Michael, darling, the appraiser was just here. He says the house is worth even more than Bartholomew thought. We're talking serious equity. I'm meeting with the architect this afternoon to finalize the plans for the new kitchen. It's going to be fabulous. You should see the sample for the marble countertops, to die for. I almost smiled. She was so blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the legal storm that was about to break over her perfectly coiffed head. The letter from Henderson and Albright would likely be delivered to Thorne's office by courier later that day, or first thing the next morning. Her dreams of Italian marble were about to encounter the hard, unyielding reality of contract law and testamentary intent. The contrast between her giddy excitement and the grim contents of the letter Mr. Henderson was drafting was a perfect illustration of the chasm between her perceived reality and the actual, documented truth. Dad had indeed been a meticulous planner, and his final project, the preservation of his true legacy, was now well underway, with his quiet, underestimated son as the diligent project manager. The renovations Amanda envisioned would have to wait. There was a more fundamental structural issue to address first, the validity of her claim to the entire estate. And that foundation, I knew, was built on sand. The letter from Henderson and Albright, a meticulously crafted document outlining our intent to contest Amanda's purported will and to submit Dad's true will for probate, was delivered to Bartholomew Thorne's opulent downtown office late that Monday afternoon. A copy was also couriered to Amanda at Dad's house, or, as she now undoubtedly thought of it, her house. I didn't have to wait long for the reverberations. My phone started ringing around 6 p.m. It was Amanda, her voice, when I finally, reluctantly, picked up on the fourth try. Mr. Henderson's advice to refer all communication to him notwithstanding, I felt a grim curiosity to hear her initial reaction. Was no longer the smug, condescending purr of the new lady of the manor. It was a shriek, a raw, unfiltered torrent of indignation and fury. Michael, what in God's name is this garbage your shyster lawyer sent? Contesting Dad's will? Are you insane? Dad left me the house. It's signed. It's legal. Bartholomew said so. Amanda, I said, my voice calm. A deliberate counterpoint to her hysteria, I suggest you discuss this matter with Mr. Thorne, and I would advise him to liaise directly with Mr. Henderson. This is a legal matter now, and it needs to be handled through the proper channels. Proper channels? She screeched. You're trying to steal my inheritance. That's what this is. After everything I did for Dad, you, who just sat around, moping in his study, living off him for years. The accusation, so patently false, so deeply offensive, given the years I had dedicated to Dad's care while she flitted around pursuing her influencer fantasies, stung, but I didn't let it show. My contributions to Dad's well-being, and his to mine, are well documented, Amanda, I said, my voice still even, as I believe are his true testamentary wishes. Mr. Henderson has all the relevant information. Please direct your inquiries and Mr. Thorne's to him. I then ended the call, ignoring her sputtered threats and accusations. My next call was from Bartholomew Thorne himself, about an hour later. His tone was a study in forced calm, the oily condescension barely masking an undercurrent of surprise and, I suspected, a dawning unease. "Mr. Stratton," he began, his voice like silk dipped in acid, "I've received a most peculiar communication from a Mr. Henderson regarding your late father's estate. I must say it strikes me as a rather desperate and, frankly, baseless attempt to disrupt a perfectly legal and straightforward probate process. Your father's last will, which I had the honor of preparing and witnessing, is unequivocally clear." "Mr. Thorne," I replied, adopting the same coolly professional tone Mr. Henderson had used. "My father, Mr. Arthur Stratton, also had the honor of preparing an earlier, equally valid will, witnessed by his long-standing and highly respected solicitors, Henderson and Albright. This document, along with a personal letter from my father detailing his concerns about, shall we say, undue influence surrounding any subsequent testamentary declarations, is now in Mr. Henderson's possession. I trust you understand the legal implications." There was a distinct pause on Thorne's end. The phrase undue influence clearly resonated. It was a direct challenge to his professional conduct, to the very legitimacy of the document he had engineered. "I see," he said finally, his voice losing some of its silken assurance. "Well, this is unexpected. I will, of course, confer with my client, Miss Stratton, and then I will be in touch with Mr. Henderson to clarify these matters." Clarify was a rather anemic term for what was likely to be a series of frantic, damage control conversations between him and Amanda. The initial salvo had been fired, and it had clearly hit its mark. Mr. Henderson called me the next morning. "Well, Michael," he said, a note of dry amusement in his voice, "it appears we have stirred the hornet's nest. Mr. Thorne contacted me late yesterday. He was less than pleased. Attempted to dismiss our claim as frivolous, threatened countersuits for malicious interference. Standard bluster. I calmly reiterated our position, reminded him of the strength of our evidence, particularly your father's letter, and suggested that a protracted and public court battle over allegations of undue influence and potential elder abuse would likely do irreparable damage to his and Ms. Stratton's reputations. Not to mention the potential for professional sanctions against him if his conduct in obtaining the later will is found to be wanting. He paused. "I believe the term persuasive counsel during a vulnerable time, as your father so delicately put it, resonated rather strongly with Mr. Thorne's understanding of his own potential liabilities." The legal maneuvering continued for several weeks. Thorne, clearly rattled, attempted a series of procedural delays, requested voluminous and largely irrelevant documentation, and even tried to argue that Dad's earlier will had been implicitly revoked by the newer one. Mr. Henderson met each tactic with calm, irrefutable legal counterarguments, his 40 years of experience in probate law proving more than a match for Thorne's aggressive, but ultimately superficial, tactics. During this period, Amanda's behavior became increasingly erratic. The grand renovation plans for the house were, of necessity, put on hold. The appraiser's report gathered dust. Her calls to me, which I dutifully ignored and referred to Mr. Henderson, became less frequent, replaced, I heard through the family grapevine, Dad's cousin Elsie, the notorious but often accurate source of information, by increasingly frantic and accusatory calls to Thorne, blaming him for not having bulletproofed the will. The image of Amanda, her dreams of Italian marble and Zen gardens dissolving into a morass of legal bills and dawning reality, was not without a certain grim satisfaction. But my primary focus remained on honoring Dad's true wishes, on ensuring that his legacy was not hijacked by greed and manipulation. The turning point came when Mr. Henderson, as part of the discovery process, subpoenaed Dad's medical records from his final year, and also requested depositions from Dad's primary care physician and the home care nurse who had attended him in his last few months. The medical records, as I had suspected, detailed Dad's increasing physical frailty, his periods of confusion, and the heavy pain medication he was often on. The physician, a cautious, elderly man who had cared for Dad for years, expressed in his deposition his surprise at the sudden change in Dad's testamentary plans and recalled Dad mentioning, with some distress, the intense pressure he was under from Amanda and her new lawyer friend. The home care nurse's testimony was even more damning. She recounted specific instances where Amanda had prevented her from being present during Thorne's visits and described Dad as being visibly distressed and exhausted after these meetings, often saying things like, "They just won't leave me be until I sign it." This was the smoking gun, the verifiable, third-party corroboration of Dad's letter and my own suspicions. When Mr. Henderson presented this evidence to Thorne, the bluster finally, definitively ceased. The threat of a public hearing, where this testimony would be aired, where Thorne's methods would be scrutinized, was clearly too much for him. His professional reputation, already somewhat tarnished according to Mr. Henderson's discreet inquiries, would be shredded. The house of cards Amanda and Thorne had constructed was about to collapse. The capitulation, when it came, was swift and remarkably unceremonious. Bartholomew Thorne, after reviewing the preliminary depositions from Dad's physician and home care nurse, and no doubt contemplating the professional and financial ramifications of a public court battle centered on allegations of exploiting a vulnerable elderly man, contacted Mr. Henderson with an offer to discuss a mutually agreeable resolution. His silken tones, Mr. Henderson later reported to me with a hint of grim satisfaction, were entirely gone, replaced by the clipped, anxious speech of a man desperate to avoid a career-ending scandal. The mutually agreeable resolution they proposed was, in essence, a complete surrender. They offered to withdraw the will Thorne had prepared, to cease contesting the probate of Dad's true will, the one held by Mr. Henderson, and to make no further claims on the estate beyond what Amanda was legitimately entitled to under that original, fair-minded document, which was, as Dad had intended, an equal share with me. There was one condition, a rather pathetic attempt to save face, that Amanda would not be required to pay my legal fees, and that there would be no public statement or admission of wrongdoing on her or Thorne's part. Mr. Henderson and I discussed it. While the idea of making Amanda and Thorne pay for the unnecessary legal stress they had caused was tempting, my primary objective had always been to honor Dad's true wishes and secure my rightful inheritance, not to engage in protracted, punitive litigation. Dad wouldn't have wanted that. "We accept," I told Mr. Henderson. "Let's put this sorry chapter to rest, and let Dad's will be probated as he intended." The relief in Mr. Henderson's voice was palpable. "Wise choice, Michael. Sometimes the cleanest victory is the quietest one." And so, the legal documents were drawn up and signed. Amanda's grand plans for renovating Dad's house into a monument to her own aspirational lifestyle evaporated. The house, according to Dad's true will, was to be sold and the proceeds divided equally between us, along with his other modest assets. Her dreams of Italian marble and Zen gardens would have to be funded by her own endeavors, not by the entirety of our father's life savings. The process of clearing out Dad's house for the sale was a poignant one. Amanda, to her credit, or perhaps simply out of a desire to avoid any further confrontation, largely stayed away, leaving the task mostly to me. It was a slow, meticulous process, sifting through a lifetime of accumulated memories, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. Each item, from his worn woodworking tools to his collection of antique maps, told a story. I kept his roll-top desk, of course, and his journals, and the faded photograph of my mother. These were the true treasures, the artifacts of a life well lived, a legacy of integrity and quiet strength. The house sold relatively quickly. Its sturdy construction and well-tended garden, Dad's beloved rose bushes now safe from Amanda's minimalist ambitions, appealing to a young family looking for a home with character. After all debts and expenses were settled, my share of the inheritance was, as Dad had intended, a comfortable sum, enough to provide a measure of financial security for my future, and perhaps to invest in a small restoration project of my own, a way to honor his love for craftsmanship. Amanda received her equal share. What she did with it, I neither knew nor particularly cared. I heard, through cousin Elsie, that she had parted ways with Bartholomew Thorne, who was reportedly now facing scrutiny from the local bar association due to several other aggressive estate planning complaints that had surfaced. Amanda, Elsie reported with a certain relish, was now espousing the virtues of downsizing and minimalist living. Her Instagram feed suddenly filled with artfully curated images of tiny succulents and rented cabins, a far cry from the marble-laden fantasies of a few months prior. Perhaps she was, in her own way, finding a new, more sustainable, if less glamorous path. Or perhaps she was simply rebranding. With Amanda, it was always hard to tell where the performance ended and reality began. As for me, I found a quiet satisfaction in the outcome. It wasn't about winning against my sister or about the money itself. It was about honoring my father, about ensuring his true wishes were respected, about upholding the principles of fairness and integrity he had instilled in me. It was about the quiet triumph of meticulous preparation and unwavering resolve over greed and manipulation. Dad's letter, the one I'd found in the secret compartment of his desk, I framed and placed on my own desk in my small apartment. Its closing words, "Live with integrity. Preserve what is truly valuable. And know that you were, and always will be, a son a father could be immensely proud of, serve as a daily reminder of the man he was and the man I aspired to be." The key to his roll-top desk, that small piece of brass, now sat in a place of honor in my top drawer. It had unlocked more than just a hidden compartment. It had unlocked the truth, and in doing so, had preserved a legacy. And that, I knew, was a form of craftsmanship my father would have deeply appreciated. The main mechanism had indeed been jammed, and someone had tried to change the combination, but the backup, as he had wisely foreseen, had worked perfectly. A year after the estate was settled, I found myself standing in front of a dilapidated but charming Victorian farmhouse a few hours outside the city. It was a restoration project, something I'd always dreamed of tackling, a way to combine my professional skills with the love of craftsmanship Dad had instilled in me. My share of the inheritance had made it possible, not as an extravagant indulgence, but as a carefully considered investment in a future I could build with my own hands, much like Dad had built his life. Mr. Henderson had handled the purchase, his legal acumen ensuring a smooth transaction. We still met for lunch occasionally, our conversations ranging from the intricacies of 19th century joinery to the enduring complexities of human nature. He'd often shake his head and chuckle, "Arthur Stratton. He knew how to build things to last, didn't he, Michael?" Wills, desks, sons. I had started the slow, methodical work of bringing the old farmhouse back to life. Peeling away layers of faded wallpaper revealed sturdy, original plaster. Sanding down blackened floorboards uncovered rich, patinated oak. It was hard work, demanding patience and an eye for detail, but each small success, each restored feature, brought a deep sense of satisfaction. It was a tangible connection to the past, a way of honoring the craftsmen who had come before me. I heard very little of Amanda. Cousin Elsie, my sporadic source of family news, mentioned that Amanda had apparently tried to launch several online wellness ventures, none of which seemed to gain much traction. Her Instagram feed, Elsie reported with a sigh, was now a confusing mix of aspirational travel photos, mostly, Elsie suspected, from stock image sites, and vague pronouncements about manifesting abundance that seemed increasingly at odds with her rumored financial struggles. Bartholomew Thorne, as it turned out, had indeed faced disciplinary action from the Bar Association and had quietly relocated his practice to another state, his reputation in our city significantly tarnished. It seemed Dad's carefully laid contingency plan had not only protected his own legacy, but had also, inadvertently, contributed to the unraveling of a predatory legal career. One cool autumn afternoon, as I was carefully restoring an original window sash in the farmhouse, a battered pickup truck pulled into the long, gravel driveway. It was Amanda. She looked different. The expensive, high-fashion clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn sweater. Her perfectly coiffed hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, free of its usual heavy makeup, looked tired, but also, strangely, more open, more vulnerable than I had ever seen it. She got out of the truck, a small, nervously held casserole dish in her hands. "Michael," she said, her voice hesitant. "Cousin Elsie told me where you were. I was in the area. I brought, well, it's just a chicken pot pie. Mom's recipe." I was momentarily speechless. Amanda, bringing me a homemade casserole? It was a plot twist I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you, Amanda," I said finally, gesturing towards the porch. "Would you like to come in? I could put the kettle on." She hesitated, then nodded. We sat on the dusty porch swing, mugs of tea in our hands, an awkward silence stretching between us, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves in the old oak trees that surrounded the farmhouse. "This place, it has good bones," she said finally, looking around at the work in progress. "It reminds me a bit of Dad's workshop, the smell of old wood." "You have liked it, I think," I replied. He always loved a good restoration challenge. Another silence, then she turned to me, her eyes surprisingly direct. "Michael, I need to apologize. For everything. For how I behaved after Dad died. For the will, for Thorn, for being such a greedy, selfish fool." Her voice cracked on the last word. I was so caught up in, I don't even know what, trying to be someone I wasn't, listening to all the wrong people. She looked down at her hands. "Thorn, you bled me dry. Took most of what I got from Dad's estate in consulting fees and investment opportunities that never materialized. I'm pretty much broke, Michael. Living in a tiny rental, working a temp job. It's humbling." I didn't say anything, just listened. This wasn't about gloating or "I told you so." This was about witnessing a painful, but perhaps necessary, recalibration. "Dad's letter," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "The one you found in his desk. Mr. Henderson sent me a copy after everything was settled. I read it, over and over. He knew me, didn't he? Better than I knew myself." Tears welled in her eyes. He was right, about the glitter and the substance. I chose the glitter, and it all just disappeared, like dust. "Dad loved you, Amanda," I said quietly. "He was just worried about your choices. He wanted you to be happy, truly happy, not just chasing some illusion of it." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know that now. It's taken me a while to see it, to see a lot of things, including you, Michael. You were always the steady one, the reliable one. I mistook that for being boring, for lacking ambition. I was wrong. You were just content, grounded, like Dad." We sat in silence again for a few moments, a different kind of silence this time, less awkward, more reflective. "The farmhouse. It's a big project," she said finally, gesturing vaguely. Do you ever need a hand? I'm surprisingly good at sanding, and I make a decent pot of coffee." I looked at her, really looked at her. The artifice was gone. The smugness, the condescension, all stripped away, leaving behind someone who looked tired, yes, but also perhaps a little more real, a little more honest than the Amanda I had known for most of her adult life. Dad had believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, even if he was clear-eyed about human frailties. "The coffee offer sounds good," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "And there's always sanding to be done on a place this old." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, and it wasn't a return to some idealized notion of a happy family. But it was, perhaps, the beginning of a new chapter, a new restoration project, one built on a foundation of hard-won truths and the possibility, however faint, of rebuilding something worthwhile from the wreckage of past mistakes. Dad, I thought, would have approved of that too. The true value, after all, often lies not in the pristine, untouched artifact, but in the careful, honest restoration of what was once broken. The tentative offer of help from Amanda and my cautious acceptance marked the beginning of a slow, almost imperceptible shift in our relationship. She started visiting the farmhouse on occasional weekends, not with the air of a proprietor assessing her assets, but as a guest, and then, gradually, as a tentative contributor. She was, as she'd claimed, surprisingly adept at the mind-numbing task of sanding old floorboards. Her former preoccupation with maintaining perfectly manicured nails abandoned in favor of practical work gloves. We didn't talk much about the past, about the will, or Bartholomew Thorne. The apologies had been made, the consequences faced. Now, it seemed, was a time for a different kind of work, the quiet, shared labor of bringing something old and neglected back to life. It was during these weekends that I began to see glimpses of the Amanda I vaguely remembered from our childhood, before ambition and insecurity had twisted her into someone almost unrecognizable. There was a dry wit, a surprising resilience, and a nascent, if hesitant, appreciation for simple, tangible achievements. One Saturday, as we were stripping layers of paint from an old fireplace mantel, she paused, her brow furrowed. "You know, Michael," she said, "Dad always used to say that the beauty of wood is that you can always uncover its true grain, no matter how many layers of varnish or bad paint someone slaps on it. You just have to be patient enough to do the work." I nodded, understanding the unspoken metaphor. We were both, in our own ways, engaged in a process of stripping away old, obscuring layers, hoping to find something authentic beneath. My life, too, had found a new rhythm. The restoration of the farmhouse became my primary focus, a labor of love that consumed my days and brought a profound sense of peace. I still took on occasional consulting projects, enough to keep my professional skills sharp and my finances comfortable, but the relentless pressure of my old city life was gone, replaced by the satisfying ache of physical work and the quiet joy of seeing something beautiful emerge from neglect. Mr. Henderson would drive out sometimes, ostensibly to check on my progress, but mostly, I think, just to sit on the porch with me, share a thermos of coffee, and talk about old times, about Dad, about the enduring value of things well made. He never mentioned Amanda's presence, though I knew he was aware of her occasional visits. He was a man who understood the complexities of family, the slow, often painful process of healing. As for the wider world, Cousin Elsie reported that Amanda's lifestyle-influencing career had been permanently shelved. She was now working a steady, if unglamorous, job as an administrative assistant at a local charity, a position she'd found on her own without any family connections. She was living modestly, paying her bills, and, according to Elsie, seemed quieter, more content. Perhaps the glitter had finally lost its allure, replaced by a dawning appreciation for the substance Dad had always valued. The farmhouse restoration took nearly 3 years. It was a slow, meticulous process, respecting the history of the old building while incorporating modern comforts. Amanda's contributions, initially sporadic, became more regular, more skilled. She developed a surprising talent for plaster repair and a keen eye for period-appropriate paint colors. We fell into an easy, unspoken working relationship, the shared task a neutral ground upon which a new, more honest, sibling dynamic could tentatively be built. When the farmhouse was finally finished, a harmonious blend of historic charm and modern functionality, I hosted a small gathering, a housewarming. Mr. Henderson came, of course, and a few old friends. And Amanda. She walked through the restored rooms, her expression one of genuine admiration. "It's beautiful, Michael," she said, her voice quiet. Dad would have loved what you've done here. You've honored him." Later, as the evening wound down, she found me on the porch, looking out at the moonlit fields. "Thank you, Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, for not giving up on me entirely, for letting me help. It's meant more than you know." I simply nodded. Some things didn't need to be said. The work itself, the shared effort, the slow, patient uncovering of the true grain, had spoken for itself. The key to Dad's roll-top desk still sat in my drawer, a reminder of a difficult chapter, but also of a father's foresight and a son's determination to uphold his true legacy. The house Dad had built, the one Amanda had tried to claim solely for herself, was now a happy home for another young family. But the farmhouse, this old structure I brought back to life, felt like Dad's true inheritance to me, not in a monetary sense, but in its embodiment of his values, craftsmanship, integrity, and the quiet beauty of something restored, something made whole again. And in that restoration, I had found not just a home, but a deeper understanding of my father, my sister, and myself. The archives of our family were complex, filled with both sorrow and grace. But the final entry in this particular volume was one of unexpected and quietly satisfying reconciliation. The foundations, once shaken, had been rebuilt, stronger and more true than before. The restored Victorian farmhouse became more than just my home. It became a quiet hub, a place where the lessons of the past informed a more intentional present. My work as a historical restoration consultant naturally found a new focus as neighbors and acquaintances, seeing what I'd accomplished with my own property, began to seek my advice and expertise for their own heritage buildings. It wasn't a path I had consciously planned, but it felt like an organic extension of my father's legacy, a way to preserve the craftsmanship he so deeply valued. Amanda's life, too, continued its slow but steady recalibration. Her administrative job at the charity evolved. She discovered a surprising aptitude for grant writing and fundraising, her old ambition now channeled into more altruistic and arguably more fulfilling pursuits. She never regained the financial standing she'd once aspired to with Bartholomew Thorne, but she found a different kind of wealth, a sense of purpose, a network of genuine colleagues, and a quiet pride in making a tangible difference in her community. Our sibling relationship, once so fraught with tension and misunderstanding, settled into a comfortable, if not deeply intimate, equilibrium. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, or she'd drive out to the farmhouse to help with a garden project, or simply to escape the city for an afternoon. The old dynamic of rivalry and resentment was gone, replaced by a shared history, a mutual, if unspoken, acknowledgement of past mistakes and a tentative, adult respect. Mr. Henderson, my father's wise old solicitor, eventually retired, passing his practice on to his capable daughter. But he remained a cherished friend, a link to my father, and a repository of quiet wisdom. He'd often visit the farmhouse, and we'd sit on the porch, much as Dad and I might have done, discussing the changing world, the enduring values, and the importance of leaving behind a legacy built on more than just material possessions. He once remarked, looking out over the carefully tended fields, "Arthur always said that a man's true wealth is measured by the integrity of his work and the love he inspires. By that measure, Michael, you are a very wealthy man indeed, and your father, I believe, would be profoundly content with how you've stewarded his true inheritance." His words were a quiet affirmation, a validation that resonated more deeply than any financial statement or legal victory. The key to Dad's roll-top desk, the one that had unlocked so much more than just a hidden compartment, still lay in my drawer. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important legacies are not those proclaimed from the rooftops, but those discovered in quiet acts of foresight, in carefully preserved truths, and in the unwavering commitment to fairness and integrity, even in the face of betrayal. Amanda's aggressive attempt to seize the estate, her dismissal of my role in Dad's life, her alliance with the predatory Thorne. These have been painful, disruptive events. But in their aftermath, something new and more authentic had emerged. A clearer understanding of family, a deeper appreciation for true worth, and a quiet, unshakable sense of my own place in the world. The renovations Amanda had envisioned for Dad's house, the Italian marble and Zen gardens, had been superficial, an attempt to impose a shallow, fashionable veneer on something with deep, authentic roots. My own restoration project, the farmhouse, had been the opposite, a patient uncovering of the inherent quality, a strengthening of the original structure, an honoring of its history. It was a metaphor I realized for the journey we had all been on. Some choose to build their lives on fleeting trends and superficial appearances. Others, like Dad, and like I hoped I was becoming, choose to build on solid foundations, with honest materials, creating something designed to last, something that holds true value, not just for a season, but for generations to come. And in that quiet, enduring strength, I found my own peace, my own fulfillment. The archives of my father's life, and now my own, were in good order, their integrity preserved, their true stories told. That, I knew, was the most valuable inheritance of all.